here we are. We are at Combative Summit 2024. I'm sitting here with Matt Ranka, Jeff Mao, John Valentine. I don't know how much of an introduction those guys need, but we're going to go through a little bit of that here in a second. I'll just start off real fast. I'm stoked. This has been an amazing day one. Compliments to John. I've been to a lot of events, to a lot of places, with a lot of people, to a lot of things. This is one of the most well-run events I've seen in terms of people being on time, like the talent level in terms of the folks that are here presenting today. I've been drinking from a fire hose and loving every minute of it, but also just the interactions I've been having with the participants here. You can hear my voice is kind of going. I've just been doing nonstop talking, trying to meet everybody and taking all this information. And here we are once again, sitting down with some people that have really influenced me, whether they know it or not, in very positive ways in my journey. And I'm excited to talk to you guys. Welcome to the Iron Sights podcast, guys.
Thanks for having us. This is great, man. Yeah.
So I'm going to start over here with Jeff Mao of Tenor. Jeff, for those people that may not know who you are, just give us the Reader's Digest version, dude.
Yeah. So in my past life, I guess I did law enforcement, lots of training, combatives, shooting, instructing. My current life is Tenor, though, where I design products, trying to solve concealment problems mostly. So belts and holsters, mag pouches, recently knife sheaths.
Yeah, I saw that with Harley.
Yeah.
That's an amazing project. That's awesome. I was really excited to hear that. How's Tenor doing, man?
We're doing really well. Yeah, it's super fun. We moved out to Idaho a couple years ago. We've grown, so we now have a team of about 50 people, and just keep growing and trying to now leverage the talent of the team to be able to put out new products much faster than we have in the past, to be able to expand the line. And yeah, really excited about where everything is going.
Well, you're not the only guy that's excited about it on your end of things. I got an opportunity to speak with Jeff Dahl for probably 45 minutes today. Dude's fired up about Tenor. He's fired up about what you guys are able to bring to the table for people in the team that's there. So that was cool for me. That was an introduction I didn't think I was actually going to get. Got to there's some connections there, which was really cool. Learned a ton from him. But I also understand I don't know, can we talk about it? There's a new product coming out. Can we talk about this?
There's lots of new products coming out.
Well, there's one that you introed. There's one that you introed this morning. There's a release coming out.
The Velo 5. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah,
okay.
Just real quick, give us the rundown on that thing.
So the Velo is our dedicated inside the waistband holster. It was probably our second product that we released. The version 4, from my standpoint, has been stale for a while. It's been like 3 years since we updated it. There's all kinds of things that I wanted to change on it. And so hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll be releasing it. So everybody here had a chance to see it. I know a bunch of you guys have already, like Matt's had one for a little bit. Mm-hmm. So it is kind of the culmination of a bunch of ideas and changes that we wanted to make, of reducing the profile of the body contour, changing up the DCC clips, so they're a different clip that provides more and I think better versatility as far as ride height and carry position. The camming bar is adjustable. Just overall, like it is all the things that I wish I would have done in the last few years that come out in this holster. So hopefully people appreciate it. For the most part, it's been received really well, but from the people who've had a look at samples and prototypes.
Right on. I mean, I've been a fan of Tenor for a long time. I'm excited to have you on the show. So I just, again, like personally right to you, man. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You. I'm going to turn it over to Matt Ranka here. Matt, it was an honor to have him on my show. It'll be about a year and a half, a little longer than that ago. It was SHOT Show 2023. It was a while back.
Time flies.
I know, right?
It goes so fast.
That was the last time I actually saw you. I think you, when I introduced you then, I think you said you actually referred to yourself as maybe being notorious when I said, like, you're kind of infamous or whatever. You said more like notorious. But for those people who may not know who you are, maybe just give us the Reader's Digest version on you, my man.
Yep. So I own a company called X-Ray Alpha, kind of specialize in training military and law enforcement, bringing practical shooting training concepts to guys that are gun professionals that carry a gun for a living. Was retired from the military, USPSA Grandmaster, have had some success in the practical world, really enjoy, competition shooting. I would kind of describe myself both as a gun professional and a competition guy. Like, I'm 100% a gamer, right? I like the process of it. I like the training. I like the discovery that comes with, like, innovating ideas and training and concepts. So I've been taking that to law enforcement, and it's been going pretty good.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, we hear from you quite frequently, sort of socially, which I really enjoy, just kind of getting your insights on stuff and hearing the conversations you get to have with people about the deeper level thinking about how things may be getting done, how people are talking about getting them done, and maybe how they should be or could be done better. That's been fun for me. But today I actually got to hear you present for quite some time. I sat down with Ben Aubin last night and John, and I said then I'm going to have FOMO tomorrow because there's going to be 2 presentations going on, and I'm going to have to stretch my time. And that absolutely happened. Like, so I got to hear some of what you're putting together today, and so much of that resonates. And when I think about a lot of the people that I've trained with, and even like on the in extremist performance side of things, when I think about Jake and the team and how they're presenting information, the influence that I think you brought to the team there, and just in general, it like so many of the things I heard you say, I'm like, man, I've heard this so many times by so many other people. And it's not that you invented it, or it's not that the first time they heard it was from you. It's just that it seems like to me, weird, that so many of the really good people that are doing so many really good things are saying the same thing. They're just saying it a little bit differently, but it's the same concepts and it's the same stuff. It doesn't seem to change.
No, that's one of the things that's really interesting. For the last, I would say, 3 or 4 years, see a big push from the training side is everybody adopting more of a practical approach and understanding, kind of destigmatizing, like, competitions are not going to get you killed. Competitions are actually a good thing, right? And that was something that for years in the shooting world didn't exist. But I think in everything else, competition is the next. It's the ultimate test, right? If it's combatives, BJJ, you can train boxing, but training boxing is one thing. Going and fighting competitively in boxing matches at whatever level is different. Same thing with BJJ, but I've worked hard to try to destigmatize that in the LE world and military, that it's only going to get you better. Right.
Yeah, that's an interesting one for me too, because I don't spend a bunch of time competing like so many other guys do. And a lot of that has to do with bandwidth and timing. A lot of it has to do with just accessibility for me where I live, and I'd have to travel 2 hours to even get in a match if I wanted to and needed to. And I've done a little bit of the steel match stuff. My point being there is, it's interesting that there is that dichotomy, in the space there. But when you think about so many other things, I heard like our guy Aaron Duggar from IEP made a statement not too long ago about that very thing and how people perceive this, and like we're saying competition shooting or practical shooting and gunfighting are not the same. Well, okay, they're not, but one can prepare you better for the other. And the analogy you used is, you got the professional football player. He goes out and runs routes against air every single day, right? Yeah. And why? Because he's building a skill, and he's getting these repetitive motions in, and he's building these processes for doing that thing better, so that when he actually gets into a game, he's prepared. It's going to help him better develop for that game. It seems like such a simple, and I don't think anybody, well, somebody would try to, but I don't think a lot of people would disagree with that statement. That makes perfect logical sense. Yet when we get to that thing, and as it relates to combatives in a lot of ways, which is the way we're here, there's such a disconnect. People have such a hard time drawing those lines or connecting those dots in such a way. And man, they get emotional about it. It's interesting.
I hate to say that, the easy response is, hey, well, it's like an ego-driven. Everybody says you got to put your ego aside. But I think in the shooting world or the combatives world, in order to excel, there has to be an element of ego. Right, but how you portray that out is one thing. It's one look at you, but you have to believe that one, that you're good. You have to believe that you're elite. You have to be putting in the work to do that, and then competition is kind of the solidifying factor. Like, you go out and like, hey, this is how I shot, and it's not saying, oh well, you're not good because you didn't shoot a good match this day. That's just a good tool or a good snapshot of how you shot at that time, at that day. Yeah. It's not an overall thing of like, you're this type of shooter because
you had a good day or a bad day.
Yeah. And but what I like about the competitive side in matches, I use it as a tool, right? It's a tool that drives training, right? That keeps developing happening, because it's a test. Yes, it's different than gunfighting, but unfortunately we can't just go out and get into gunfights. Right. And you can't get anything that's, similar in terms of stress. But what you can do on the competitive side, just like kind of stage anxiety. Like if you're competing, when I wrestled, I loved it because it was just you and another guy.
That's it.
It's all there. Everyone sees it. One person has to win, one person has to lose. Right. But at least you have the humility to go out there and kind of commit to that process and show, hey, this is what I'm doing. You know, and it's, for a lot of people, it's hard.
It is hard. So here's the thing that I'm taking away from today. I'm going to turn this over to John in a second. Is I really don't know what to expect come to this thing. Like, I was excited about it. I mentioned this before, so I'll repeat myself. And then I was slightly terrified by it as well, in a few different ways, because it is such the unknown for me and for a lot of people. And a lot of what people are covering here this week, and the talent that's here doing that and participating and consuming it, it's a little obscure. It's a little misunderstood. But at the same time, these guys are like deeper thinkers. They're thinking about it differently. And one of the things you opened up with today, we talked a little bit about last night, John, was like, what does winning look like? And so we were talking about, you can't go out and get into a gunfight every day to find out if you can win one of those things or not. But you can do things and work through processes that can help you be better for the outcome that you're looking for, going back to competitive shooting. So, John, I mean, again, you opened up the day that way. At the summit, we've seen quite a few presentations today. And really what you just said there is kind of the nuts and bolts, I think, of what this is it's bringing all these pieces together from all of these people that have gone out, tested it, pressure tested it, made a lot of mistakes, had to go through a journey in order to be in a position to kind of tell the story and convey the message in a way that isn't, this is a solution to your problem. It's more like, here's a different way to think about finding a solution to the problem. And one of the problems that I think you've solved for is getting everybody in one spot at one time to be able to do that, which to me is and I've said this before, is amazing to me that you're able to do all of that, you know, going back to that word ego and stuff like that. So I'm curious, John, I mean, as little sleep as you've had, as hard as you've been working, how do you feel like today went?
It seemed like everybody had a great time, which is a great, it's a great gauge as far as like, hey, how did the event go? It's just everybody was happy. Everybody seemed like they got what they were looking for. And this is one of those events you can show up, you can be here and still have that FOMO, still like, man, be conflicted and have that dilemma of having two incredible classes by two incredible instructors and, just which one do I go to, right? And then like, even as you make that choice, you're still worried about what's going on there. Right, yeah. So I thought it went well. I thought everybody understands just kind of higher level thinking as far as like how to approach training, and not even just training for this, but I think like the way the lines between tactical and practical shooting are being blurred. I think this idea of combatives, I would like that to see just one big bucket. I was like, that's where the shooting is. That's where the fighting is. That's where the fitness is. I would like to see that. That's just my individual skills as far as what I bring to the fight. That's where I would like to see combatives go. And I think as far as culture change, which I think Matt and Ben Steger have been doing a lot of, Jeff producing, some of the best hardware as far as solving problems with hardware that we didn't even really know, right? Most people don't even understand like how to T&E their gear. So I think they got a good snapshot of that. And through the dry fire, through the drills that we did. So yeah, I think today went well. I'm incredibly happy. Everybody seems like they had a great time, and not just the students, but also the instructors, just getting them together and having somebody like Matt here to introduce, like, fill in those gaps that we may or not have from the shooting side. And, we were able to contribute to him and his game and everything that he does professionally. And then not having to worry about what the holsters are going to do, that they're actually going to be where they're supposed to be. So, yeah, I think everything went incredibly well today. I
don't know how everybody else did. We had one minor malfunction in the IEP presentation today. But outside of that, it looked like everything went smooth. But I would agree with you, man. Like, I think it's been a major success so far. I'm really excited for the next 2 days. Yeah. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff here. Jeff, like I've heard you described as like the mad scientist over at Tenor, probably for good reason. I think that's, what do they call that? I don't know what kind of comment that is, but I'll move on. It's been a long day, to be honest. But I'm curious, just from you and your experience being the mad scientist who's in the lab every day, trying to build these products and solve problems for people and whatnot, you being able to get out of that office and into this environment. How did it go for you today? What were your takeaways? It was great.
This is a fantastic event. So really grateful to be here and that John was able to coordinate all the people and get them all here together. I think is a unique thing to have the number of people with the experience and the perspective they have all in the same place. In the shooting space, this doesn't really happen. And so I think it's a unique thing in the combative side. And it's awesome guys like Matt came from the shooting space to come and interact with that. So overall, I think it's great.
What's like your biggest takeaway today, man? What was like, was there any light bulb
I have
moments?
Questions. So I got questions. So one question is, just a minute ago, you were talking about it being like you got to have ego. So is self-image potentially one of the biggest challenges that people have to performance?
Oh man, that's a great question.
I think it is. I think you first and foremost, you have to believe that you can do it, right? In the shooting world, it was things that, I kind of had an idea where I wanted to go, what I wanted to be, but I didn't really know what was possible, right? And then I had the opportunity, through my professional life to get in front of people that showed me things that I was like, well, I just saw it. That's real. Like, if he can do it, I got to be able to do it.
So, So then what is the difference between every bunch of people saw that, right? Not everybody did what you did with that same information. So what's the difference between you going after the thing and accomplishing something with it versus maybe some of the other people who were there that saw those same things?
I think a lot of it comes down to like your drive to do it, right? Is it an important goal to you? Okay. Right. And everybody will assign different goals at different levels, right? And this will sound really bad, but for some people, hey, the most important thing that's important to me is I want to be a good family man, right? I want to be a good father, be a good husband, and then everything else takes a backseat to that, right? I always believed like, yes, I want to be a good husband, a good father, but I also can do this, right? And I never thought that I couldn't take on more and more. Right. So I would set goals, kind of arbitrary goals. Right. And then if I hit it, that wasn't the defining endpoint. Right. It was belief that, hey, that's a road stop. Now I'm going to set another one. And for me, from a growth standpoint, that was important that I had to always have something to be working to. Right. And then having the opportunity to see, just like this event, like great people that are pushing things in different levels, different spectrums. And you see, like, I would always draw parallels. Right, I take it like stuff I work, getting the training from Aaron and IEP and talking with Jake. I try to draw parallels to what they're doing versus what I'm doing. Right, and there's a lot of bleed over. Right, the same thing. You see it where people that are musicians or do soul activities and they practice themselves and get to a very high level are typically understand training at a cerebrally at a different level than most people do.
Yep.
Right? Because they're committed to do the work. They like the isolation. They're able to sit down, focus, critically think about what they're doing and pick it apart and kind of reverse engineer it. So I think that's the biggest difference in it's goals, right? It's drive. If it's not important to you, you're not going to do it.
Yep. Scott, do you see that in human performance?
100%. 100%. And I think I just had this conversation you asked a very similar question to a conversation I had with this guy, Mark Smith. Maybe you know him, JBS Training Group, the other day. And he was talking about this very thing in the ego and where the ego fits into this. And the belief system that you have that you can do it is where it starts, right? You have to have that. And then there's a self-talk or there's a conversation you're having in your head about, okay, I can do this, but how do I get there? And if I wasn't able to do the thing today, does that mean I suck, right? No, it just means I need to do something different in order to get there. So we talked a little bit about like having knowledge, right? There's an education behind what it is that you're doing or what you're trying to do, not just seeing somebody else do it and go, oh, I'm going to do what that guy did. And you were talking about that today, Matt. You had a couple of questions from the audience just about, your practice, like and how you practice. And I think the awareness with regard to what it is, the thing that you're trying to train, and then bringing the ego to that, like, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to make a full commitment to it, and I can do it. Yeah. But then also there's a mindset piece that comes into that with, like, I have to be talking to myself positively about doing this, not thinking about the things that I can't do, thinking about the things that I can and I want to do more specifically, and then putting a plan together behind that. And I think that's a big missing piece today with people that want instant gratification. And if they don't have that ego in check, that's always going to get in the way, and they're always going to have that internal conversation. And when it's not going their way, and when they did suck that day, whatever it is they were training, it manifests into this other thing, which is maybe dipping back into a comfort zone because that makes your ego feel better. So you go back to the thing that you're good at. So like human performance space is a perfect example of that. I mean, it's constant. Anybody listening to the show that's ever done any kind of working out or whatever, everybody has drifted to the things that they're good at. And why are they doing that? Because maybe they don't have the knowledge of how to maybe fix it. But I think more of it is like, I don't want to suck. Like, and I'm not sure I can be better. And it's just easier for me to do this other thing and be okay at this or good at this one thing and be satisfied with that. And I think to Matt's point, I think it's just not being satisfied. Like that is once I achieve that thing, like moving to the next level. And that's the point I would add to this and turn it into a question is, one of the things that I recognize from a lot of guys that are here that I'd never met before, that are instructing in trying to pick up kind of that ego piece and that ego check. I've said this before a lot of times, is like, I like to study the characters of who it is, like who's delivering the information and how they're delivering it. And then also, after that, once I've kind of assessed that from however I'm doing that, social media, whatever's being provided for me, whatever I can consume, then it's listening and watching how that information is being delivered consistently. Not at the things that they're necessarily good at, but the things that they're talking about, right? I think inherently they are good at those things, but it's not filled with a bunch of ego. It's not listen to me because, and I'm the best at this and I never suck. They all have talked about, like whether it's been in one-on-one conversations or whatever, about their journey, about how they got there and all the messing up they did and all the mistakes they made. And that's the part that you don't hear about. And I think if you don't have a really good sense of your own ego, that gets lost a long time ago. And you'll never be one of those guys at the Combative Summit instructing anything ever. So again, like studying those guys and watching them and listening to them, there is a sense of humbleness and quiet confidence. There's also supported by a very healthy ego, knowing what they can do and what they're very capable of, and really managing all of those things and keeping them in check. It's been impressive actually to watch and listen. And then I think the whatever you call them, participants, disciples, they're here trying to absorb it all. They're representing that too, which is different than a lot of training seminars or a lot of conferences or whatever that I ever go to. It makes this thing pretty unique. So again, the question, John, is like, for you, in terms of bringing all these things, these guys together, the ego piece, the knowledge piece, and I guess all the things that come along with it. I don't know if you were able to take anything away from today, outside of just trying to make this thing happen. But what was a major takeaway from today outside of everybody had fun and a good time and seemed to get a lot out of it?
The major takeaway, especially because there was so much more variety than there was last year, in terms of like that, we got dry fire component, we've got a knife component, and we brought 2 grandmaster shooters here, and I love the overlap in terms of how people describe things. So the way Matt was describing how he approaches training in a very intellectual way, where he is actually thinking about what it is that he's doing. He's paying attention to what is going on with his body. That's very similar to like me as a jiu-jitsu guy, as far as like, I want to go ahead and watch the tape of myself rolling and see where that mistake happened. So that way I can correct it. And so it's exactly the same thing that he was doing with his grip. Is like, well, that wasn't right. Let me readjust, assess, fix it, make it do right, and then kind of reattack that problem. And you're just kind of seeing that consistent theme through everybody, right? Like you guys are like, hey, I want to get data from everybody so we can kind of get a profile as far as like what the general student is like. Some of the students that attend, I could very well be their student tomorrow. Right. So everybody was their approach, even Jeff's approach to building holsters is like thinking of like, he's not just meeting a market demand. He's thinking about, he's truly analyzing the problem of concealment and an application of the holster, and then going back and designing it. And maybe people don't understand what's going on there, right? And so I guess that if I had to sum it up to 2 words, it would say that everybody is process driven, and the outcome or whatever it is that they put out is really a byproduct of that. And I think even if you ask these guys to come up with, hey, let's teach a dry fire clinic next year, or let's see what tenor core looks like in 2 years, it's like you probably might see something different, because there's going to be this
evolution.
Well, not just the evolution, but there's repetition, and through the repetition in that process is that there's this refinement that's going on. And so that's my overall takeaway from watching all the guys work, and I think that's why everybody's able to get along so well, because everybody's like they're looking for mastery. Maybe whatever their craft is different, but that's really what they're all looking at. They're seeking mastery, and they're engaged in this process of repetition and refinement. That's just like, it keeps them curious, and it keeps them excited, and it keeps them engaged. And everybody is so passionate about how they speak, because they're still excited about what it is that they're doing. Like, I've never seen a more engaged dry fire clinic. And like, dry fire is like how boring is that, right?
Well, Matt would tell us his favorite thing.
I think I said that I was like, all right, who's sick of this? Dude, I know, right? Yeah. Welcome to the nightmare.
But everybody was still so captivated. Like, you still kept the audience attention. Same thing with Mike Scherhoff. Same thing with Ben. Same thing with everything we talked about, just the passion and like how everybody presented. Even when Jeff like came up and just kind of briefly talked about like, hey, this is, how to use the holster, how to take the clips off properly, using the lever, it's the passion in what everybody does and whatever their chosen craft and where they're choosing to seek mastery. It's evident. So
yeah, it was bleeding that today for sure, right, across the board. I couldn't agree with you more. I don't know that I processed that, and I'm a processor. I'll walk away from today, probably not sleep tonight thinking about it, and then come back tomorrow and have more things not to sleep about. But I want to turn this back over to Jeff real quick, because you posed an interesting question there about the ego, and I wonder what comes first with regard to maybe the chicken or the egg kind of statement as it relates to like mental toughness and grit with regard to the things that we're actually doing practically, and then having to maintain that mindset to actually be able to do it well on the side of business and in your own training. Where do you think grit and again, like mental toughness fit into this as it relates to ego?
Yeah, I think that that is an interesting thing, because so sometimes people will say the grit or the mental toughness is the thing that sustains you, right? And that's probably true. But as Matt was just, talking about self-image and how that translates in his life, I guess I was thinking about just the difference. It's like there's areas in my life where I have bad self-image and I don't perform. There's areas in my life where I have a totally different self-image and there's performance in those areas.
That resonates with me for sure. Yeah. And it's like, is it really, if I'm performing at a high level in a certain area, is it really grit that is driving that? I don't know. I mean, those are super interesting questions, right? For sure, like my perspective of myself and like what I think, like, so we're gonna do, we're gonna hit this financial goal, or we're gonna hire these people, or we're gonna work on this project. And it's like, I can see that, I know where that's going, and it's like I feel like I will it to happen, right? Yeah. And there's other areas in my life where it's like dry fire. Oh, I got to do that again, right? And then you see the performance difference. I don't have the same outcome that I desire, but I don't grind through the thing, and I don't get the results. But that also is ties back to things that I want to talk to you about coaching, and like, what does that look like to, like, if you have the grit, like, what does it take to actually grind through the thing so you have different self-image about multiple areas in your life so you can actually achieve performance in all of those different areas?
I think that's the self-image piece, right? And you talk about like self-talk, like that's such a unique thing to the individual, right? So I will tell you, like, the way that I talk to myself would probably not be ideal for everyone, right? But that's part of my process. Now, there were things that I've done, I remember guys having a lot of anxiety about, hey, I have to go perform this task operation, right? This is me. This all falls on me. And I would have conversations with guys like, you're looking at you're approaching this the wrong way. You're looking at it like, oh, don't fuck up. Don't fuck up.
Yep.
A different way to look at it is like, this is my time. Watch this. Watch me do this. Right? I'm about to crush this. right? And just that little flip in mentality, right, pays dividends on the training side, right?
So how do you create that flip though? Like if you don't have that for one type of task or one skill, what can you do to change that perspective?
From my opinion, it's understanding and realizing that you've done the work to be at the level you need to be, right? So for me, I have, I'm a very big proponent of like the live conversation. Like, hey, you believe in something, I may have a conflicting view. Let's talk about it right now. No, I don't need to prepare to defend anything that I believe on the training side or anything like that. So I've done the work. You've done the work. Nobody's going to challenge you about holster design because the things that you know to be true are true, right? And I believe that about the way that I train and the process that I promote on the training side. Now, I'm always open to, hey, if you believe something different than me, if you prove to me that this is better, I will abandon what I'm doing immediately and adopt your way, right? But it comes at like, what gets somebody to that level where like, yep, I know I'm going to perform at a really high level. It's an understanding that you've done the work, you've put in the time, you've put in the reps, right? You've been through that process, right? Now it's the time to demonstrate where you're at.
Yeah, I think the word is like commitment to it, but then also you're going back knowing, how do you know? It's because of all the failures and all the things that you didn't do or you weren't able to accomplish at some point. And that's the journey, because you've done all the things and sought out the right things to fill the gaps or whatever along the way, whether that was intrinsically or extrinsically to get there. So that gives you that confidence. And then going back to this is my beliefs. If you show me something that's better, I will abandon everything. You don't get to this point, right? In terms of success, whether that's in relationships, business, shooting, whatever it happens to be, without having to have done that several times, right? Because at some point you had an objective truth, whatever that was. At least you thought you did. And then to your point, somebody showed you something that you didn't think was possible, and now your truth has been turned on its head, so to speak. And now that has to happen multiple times in your journey and whatever it is that you're doing in order to form, I think, that grit. I think that might be the answer, is like you have to fail at that stuff and you have to realize that a few times, and you have had to have the commitment to keep doing that over and over and over again to get to a point where you are that confident.
I think failure is the key component to growth, right? Mm-hmm. If I would objectively look at like what I have learned from successes versus what I've learned in failure, it's definitely skewed. I've learned way more from failure, right? And I've been not afraid to fail, right? I think that idea, like a practical approach to training, you want to create conditions where you're pressure testing things, and with pressure testing comes failure, right? And that's where you actually learn. I always said it today, like you would never take your car to a mechanic when it's running perfectly.
Right.
You have to break it, understand how it broke, and then learn how to fix it. And that's all centered, in my opinion, around willingness to fail. Yep.
Failure becomes, I think most people think about failure as these big catastrophic things, right? Mm-hmm. But once you are comfortable with that, they become small things, right? So the success isn't in, I totally bombed at this huge thing and it ruined my life. The success then it really becomes in, I'm willing to try different things. It's like micro versus macro failure, right? And I think about this just as a product design. And like a junior engineer will come in, they're unwilling to try different things and make mistakes.
Yep.
And like, I don't really care at all. And I try all kinds of crazy little things and make micro adjustments on things to get to a point, because I know that failing in the micro is the thing that in the long run will allow that project to get to the spot we want it to be, right? To get to something that is new, to get to something that's different, to get to just a different level of performance.
Yeah, and you mentioned it depends on the person, like in what's inside them or whatever. There was a question you actually got asked today about your 5 minutes into your 10-minute session or 10 minutes into your 15th session, and it's just not going well. It's not going right. Do you just move on from that? And how do you readjust, or do you just keep pushing? And then your answer was, well, for me, I keep going. But I'm diagnosing those little things that you mentioned. So you asked about the human performance space. It's the micro adjustments and the volume of those micro adjustments over time that provide the biggest differences. So people are looking for like this magic answer or this instant gratification or whatever it is on, give me the $5,000 handgun. That's the one that'll make me the better shooter, as an example, right?
Always.
Right. It's always the case. It's the equipment, it's the gear or whatever that makes me better at this, versus understanding that it's the inputs that you're putting into whatever it is that you have, whether that's on the platform doing a deadlift or, behind the handgun in your dry fire or whatever the case in business. In a product design, it's making this little adjustment here that then over time adds up to all these other things that you can then look back on. But if all you've been focused on is that little failure, and that's what you're programming in your brain, rather than looking at it like a success, if that's the way we kind of want to boil it all down to, then and that's where you're focused. Well, that's the majority of your time is going to be spent going back to like what you're good at and some things and what you're not good at the other things. I bet if you're not good at those things, it's because, again, like, oh, I got to do that dry fire shit again. Like, which the results you are not getting, as I've heard so many people say, I don't know who, if I knew exactly who invented this, I would quote them, but your results that you're not getting are directly related to the work that you're not putting into it. So, again, just going back. And so like, if you decide like I suck today, so I'm just not going to do the work, well, then you should expect to continue to suck at whatever that thing is. Doesn't mean you suck, but it means you're going to suck at that thing.
I think if you're having, days where, hey, it's not clicking, it's not going well, now you have the best condition for growth.
Yeah.
Right? Because now the work of training completely changes. Now you have to perform. Right? You understand what you're capable of doing, whether you're performing at 60% of your, what you would perceive as a good level, 80%, and it's just not clicking. Now you have conditions that would, from a shooting standpoint, might mimic more of a reality, right? You have to perform. So maybe if you're constrained by resources and you have 200 rounds and it's not clicking, I wouldn't recommend we'll just eat all those 200 rounds, but I would say stay there for a third of it and see what you can get when the conditions are not in your favor.
And reevaluate.
It's easy for everyone to succeed when everything's perfect and you feel great, right? But the days that I wake up and I know, hey, I gotta put this weight vest on, I've got to go for a walk, I need to do this before my kids get up for the bus. And the last thing I want to do is I want to go have a cup of coffee and answer DMs. That's what I love to do.
That's the other nightmare.
But doing it, fighting through that, like that is growth to me.
Yeah, I love that. Like the failure presents the perfect environment for that growth. And again, so that goes back to the mindset, and then where does the grit fit into that? It depends, as they say, I think, on who the person is, what it is you're practicing, but really what you're committed to actually getting accomplished and what you believe you can actually do. Again, there's an underlying theme, again, I think, with what's happening here at the summit and those growth opportunities that you're seeing people take. And I'm watching, like, not one time, and this is not embellishing it, not one time that I see anybody today, like, get visibly frustrated. Not with anything. I saw a lot of people being challenged and really struggling with whatever the concept was or the technique was or whatever else. And part of that was the environment that they were in. So I think that's the next piece, is like the environments. Like, what are those conditions within the environment? Who are you surrounding yourself by? Who are you training with that helps you get there? And you very well could be in the wrong room for that, because all the conditions could be really well set up for you in terms of failure and success and whatever. But if you're in the room with the wrong people, and that could be, no matter how bad a day you have, you're still the best shooter in the room, or you're still the best black belt in the room, or whatever else.
You're in the wrong room.
You're in the wrong fucking room. You're in the wrong fucking.
You got to find a different room.
You need to find a new room.
Yeah.
You absolutely need to find a new room. And so that obviously people found that here, and that's why they come here. They know they need to be in the different room. And I think that's the interesting part about, like, people that have reached levels at business, production of products, shooting, combatives, whatever else. They are constantly seeking that new room. So going back again to mindset and ego and the grit and whatever else, they are here for that and that alone. And I don't know if you can program that into somebody. I really don't. I think it's a unique group of individuals that kind of come together in these spaces to do this. And not everybody is that guy. I'm not saying everybody here is that guy. I don't know. But my observations, again, kind of studying what I'm seeing and hearing and sort of taking in sense. There's a lot of stuff going on, right? I'm trying to take things in, and, you know, dudes are touching other dudes, and how are they doing that, and what level of comfort did they have? They're all trying to find that space in the room that's the right place and time for them to be to accept that growth opportunity. So I don't know, it's an interesting conversation and a really good question that you posed there.
I think one of the maybe why you see that here is because I think jiu-jitsu is a microcosm of all of those things.
Oh, that's probably a really good point.
Yeah. So then one of the weird things about, and I have a little bit of experience, not a ton, but you can have somebody who totally understands that and applies that on the mat in their jiu-jitsu, but is a total loser in the rest of their life.
They don't know how to understand.
It's just a thing.
They don't know
but then you also have people who apply it on the mat and understand it on the mat and learn it on the mat, and then are able to apply that. And whether they're bringing that to their jiu-jitsu or whether they're taking that from jiu-jitsu and applying it other places, I don't know. But there is an element of, like, you have to have a certain self-image if you're going to win this contest between two people, right? But you also, everybody who does jiu-jitsu is humbled at some point.
Oh, 100%.
Right? So that is a somewhat unique compared to most other sports, where it's like, and the humbling takes place daily, right? Versus other sports, you could go weeks or months without experiencing that same level of humility, just because of the nature of the contest, and also the grit of you have micro losses all the time, right? Because it is about the strategy of positioning yourself to try to take advantage, and you're constantly winning and losing in the moment while you're grappling with somebody, right? And so all of those things are like microcosms of all the other stuff we're talking about, and it translates, I think, really well.
Actually, I don't know if it was you, Matt, maybe you said this today, but somebody was talking on that same topic of coming in. Actually, it was you, John, like the white belt, the bodybuilder that comes in to try jiu-jitsu, right? Who has all these physical attributes that could be really good for jiu-jitsu. Maybe there's some other things that maybe aren't so good, but what's going to happen, and who does he think he is walking in the door, based on all these accomplishments and all this practice and all these micro failures that he had to have to maybe be at this point in his, from a physique perspective and a knowledge that he has about himself, and then be humbled, because you're going to get your ass kicked. And again, going back to jiu-jitsu, everybody's been there because everybody was a white belt at some point. And so building on that, and again, it goes back to the competition side of shooting. And again, this is the value I don't think I understood coming in, and when it was introduced to me in the ways that it's been introduced to me. And that is what you just said. It's very similar in competition shooting. I don't care how good you think you are when you go out there and the pressure is on. And whether that's, your name's going on a scoreboard, right? At the end of the day, right? You described that a few times today, and then how that gets adjusted, and what your feelings are about that as a grandmaster versus an A class, and those kind of things. I think that's actually a very good point in what it teaches people about how to solve and handle problems, most importantly with themselves, and how to get past those mind blocks or whatever else. I don't know, John, you want to weigh in on this?
Well, I think everyone has different definitions for what failure means. And it's like, okay, I figured out this doesn't work, so let me readjust. I think that's really what it is. It's just the self-awareness. And it's like people kind of treat failure like the same way they would in public school. Like, oh, I got an F, I'm going to get in trouble or something like that. So they look at these tests wherever, pick your sport, competition shooting, jiu-jitsu, MMA, whatever it is. They look at it and they look at failure and they kind of think like that failure defines them, as opposed to thinking of like, well, what actions I decide to do from here, where I am objective about assessing myself as far as like what work I did and more importantly, what work I didn't do. And that's really what happens with most people. Like they kind of get the result that they weren't looking for just because they just didn't do the work. And that's truly the case, right? And even then, seeing what's possible out there, I think if they look at that and they're more they have that curiosity and they think about like, well, if that guy can do it the same way Matt was talking about, like if these people can achieve these results, they've got 2 arms, 2 legs, just like I do. They've got the same conditions I do to train. Why aren't I getting those results? I want them, and actually go get them and actually do the things that's required. All these things that we're trying to do today, whether or we that these guys are presenting their work and their craft, they've done that through diligent practice and just being objective. And that's why like there is all of this parallels between like what they've discovered, what they've uncovered, even the language they decide to use as far as like how they got there, right? So yeah, that's my place.
So Matt was talking about like hitting, like that's a road stop and now I have to set new goals and go do the thing. And I think there's whatever that next goal is. Like a lot of people run into that and we're talking about practice and training and they don't know how to train. Part of it is this exploration process that you have to be willing to take too. And I don't know that people know how to do that really well. So they're looking for an answer. They don't know how to explore that answer. So again, whether it's human performance, shooting, whatever, they're constantly going to somebody else, something outside of them to get it. And you need to do that. Like you have to go see what other people are doing and talk to people that have been through the journey and whatever. But they're hesitant to look inward to what do I need to do to explore this problem as it exists for me. So kind of flipping the script on you, like where do you think that came for you? Because that's all it seems that Tenor has been doing since its inception, is constantly exploring how to do things differently, better. Maybe it's the same and continue to do it the same and being okay with that and knowing the reasons why. Where does that come for you?
For me, my wife and I would describe myself as a tinkerer. And in some ways that keeps me from actually having high levels of performance in specific areas. But I like to see a problem, whether it's a physical problem or a performance problem or a teaching problem, like break that thing down into its component parts and then figure out how do I put it together to make it better, or how to explain it to somebody so that they can understand it and do something with it. Ultimately, like my dad was a tinkerer.
Okay.
He was somebody, he didn't do much with his tinkering sometimes, but he definitely like played with stuff. Everything we had, electronics, whatever, was always like torn apart and like tried to put back together and maybe didn't work quite right. But he played with stuff all the time. And I started to play with stuff. So I took that and it's like, well, how do I take that thing and then do something with it? And then when it comes to product design, like that is like, you have to complete something. It doesn't have to be very good, but you have to at least complete something, because if you don't, and usually like, what's the minimal amount of work necessary to complete something so you can analyze that thing and then make that thing better, right? And so if the quicker that cycle repeats, the faster you can get to something that's actually good. And what most people do, I think, is they want the end thing that's really good, but they don't want all those intermediate cycles of stuff that doesn't work very well, right? And I think that's going to happen with human performance stuff as well, right? If you're going to, like, you have to be okay with not shooting this drill well, right? Because you can't get to the point where you eventually can shoot the drill well, right? And you're not going to get, it goes back to the things you're saying about people practicing the things that they're good at, right? You got to go tinker. Like, what's the thing that I'm not good at? Let me play with that thing. Oh, I'm not good at that big drill. Okay. Can I take that drill and break that down into components? Like, what are the physical skills that are put back together to perform that drill, and then play with that stuff and then put it all back together and try it and see what happens. And slowly through that process, your performance is going to increase.
You mentioned something you talk about the minimal amount of tasks to accomplish something, right? That you have to do the minimal amount of work. And I think that's really interesting, you talk about like innovating shooting training specifically. We're not innovating how to shoot, right? We're innovating the explanations on how we get there. And it goes down to like, let's simplify the process. Because before, when I learned how to train and how to shoot, there were long diatribes about certain aspects that now I think, from my own belief in training, like I have completely abandoned. I don't even talk about that thing, right? And it's the same thing. You're breaking down what is actually important. right? Well, if I do this thing, if I put all my emphasis on this one thing, it's going to fix, if I fix A, it's going to fix B, C, and D by default, because this is the minimal amount of work, minimal thing that I need to pay attention to. And it's not saying I don't need to do a lot of work in it. You have to do a lot of work at that one thing, but realize that one thing is going to fix the 10 other things that you used to just have kind of nonsensical conversations about.
It's like the grip versus anticipation, like all of the stuff that comes together. And what people see is they see a result on the target, right? They're trying to figure out, okay, if I'm shooting to the left or low to the left, why? And everyone has all these different kind of explanations about it. And a lot of people want to say it's anticipating or pre-ignition, post-ignition, push, and all of this stuff. And it is trying to figure out, well, what is the actual problem? Like, you have a theory about it, and then you go test it, you do it yourself. And then if you're an instructor, can you go in front of a class and coach those people in a very simple way to execute the same thing? And are they getting similar results? So
from the instructor standpoint, the things that I've, learned and taught, like I'm teaching just based off my experience. And I can't, in order for me to identify a mistake, believe me, I've made that mistake 100 times, right? I went down the wrong road, and you're trying to simplify that. To mention where you talk about proving, is this mistake real? Is it a flinch? Is it whatever?
Yep.
And, myself and Ben, we've put a lot of effort into demoing things incorrectly, like actively doing the mistake to show the result of the mistake, right? And that, to me, that was, when we first started discussing, that was a novel concept that you never see.
Right, you're not going to do that.
A bad demo, like, it's a purposeful bad demo. Like, watch, this is the mistake. Now I'm actually making the mistake that you're going to make, unconsciously. I'm going to actively do it with the way that I pull the trigger with my entire hand. And then you'll see the result. And when people can see that now, when they tie cause and effect together, which is really what I think shooting evolution of training has done, is you're just trying to get people aware of when mistakes happen. Why did it happen? And did you feel it happen? Right. And the simplest explanation to me is always going to be the best. We always go back to stability of the grip. You're violating that principle, fix that principle. And the way you do it, explore pressure, right? Exert different pressures onto the gun, and you'll get different results.
So I wonder, just in your question, the question I had of you, like the exploratory process, and you said your dad was a tinkerer. So maybe a little bit of that's programmed into your DNA. So maybe a little bit of that's nature, and then some of it's nurturing. You saw your dad doing it, and maybe that influenced a little bit. So moving over to like the shooting side of things, specifically the competitive shooting side of things, with all this stuff that you've done, the people that you've worked with, the people that you trained with, when you look at the best shooters, however we're measuring that metric, right, in whatever environment it might be, and there's lots of them to do. I wonder, have you ever thought about like how much of that is just, this is somebody that actually has this somewhere programmed into their DNA and they're just going to be good at this, versus the nature, or that's the nature part, versus the nurture part? Like, how much of this stuff can we actually get somebody better at that doesn't have this kind of pre-programmed into them? And the pre-programming might be understanding how their body works and just having a good kinesthetic awareness, which is a little bit of nurture and nature. We've all seen, like, CC would describe those people as motor morons, or what's the other? More mental midgets.
I'm sitting right here.
Is this a motor moron or a mental midget? Which is it? Can they not is it just that they cannot comprehend this and put the pieces in together? And the next question would obviously be, why not? We don't have to go down that road yet. But I wonder, again, going back, like, how much is this nurture versus nature?
Well, I think, to go back, is a mental midget or a motor moron, right? That's where, from an instructor, that's now becomes my responsibility. That's the art of the instruction.
100% agree.
Right now, John and Jeff are making the exact same mistake. They cannot get the same feedback. They're two different people, right? They don't think the same way, right? So from conversations you've had, now that becomes the art of instruction, where John, it might be like, dude, you're making the same damn mistake. Stop doing it.
Right.
And then somebody else that's more cerebral has to be like, okay, listen, did you feel that happen? This is what happened. This is the cause of it. This is what you have to do to fix it. right? And you have to be, the art of instruction is so critical when you talk about coaching, right? And I don't ever like refer to myself as a coach, right? I'm teaching shooting, but what I'm really doing is I'm teaching people how to train, right? And I prefer to teach principles and concepts over techniques, right? And I think what a lot of people do is, well, we just show all these techniques, you know, to give people's options. Like, people don't want options; they want best practices,
Right.
right? They want
they want the answer.
Yeah, they want the answer, but really, and from my opinion, on the training side, the answer isn't, we'll do this and you'll get the result. Pay attention to this, go through the inductive process, and it's going to click.
It'll happen.
Right? You have to, you know, we see it with predictive shooting. We see it with a doubles progression, right? Everybody starts off the same way. What you see from 275 to 350 rounds, everyone's like, same comment. Dude, you completely changed shooting for me. And I was like, yeah, that's 300 rounds, right? That's the art of the instruction, right? You have to go through the process. Inductive learning, experiential learning, in my opinion, is the only way to truly like develop mastery. I can't teach you, you know, how I hold the gun. I can teach you, this is what I'm trying not to violate in terms of principles, but my hands are based this way. I shoot this type of gun. Your hands are bigger. They may be stronger. You shoot a different gun. We can't hold the gun the same way, but we can both not violate the same principles, right?
It's interesting when you put it that way too, because when you think about the principles, let's just take it back to shooting as just in the concept of itself. When you think about it, it is so easy. Like when you think about it, like being good at this is not so easy, but shooting a firearm or getting from 15 yards or 5 yards or whatever, getting the bullet to hit the paper is not that hard to do. But to get it to do what you want it to do on that paper, there's so many things there. And people are trying to be perfect at it. And a lot of instruction is about trying to be perfect. That's been my experience anyway. Trying to be perfect with something rather than trying to understand the principles of something that would then lead people down the path of being closer to perfect, which is never going to be done. That's the other interesting part about like competitive shooting. Like are you shooting? How perfect are you?
Shooting is, I'm not by a long. Shooting is the hardest, most simple thing.
Yeah, that's my point.
Right?
I think I would describe it not as easy, but simple, right? But very, very hard.
Yeah, at the same time.
Yeah.
And seeking that perfection just is part of the process. But again, it's going back to something Mark said to me the other night, but also knowing that no matter how hard you try, you will never be that way, and being okay with that. And also, in his words, being fascinated by it. It's so fascinated that I'm just going to keep trying all these and exploring all these different things in order to continue to get better in this process so that I can, and this is what, again, going back to what you're saying, is so that I can simplify it for the next guy, right?
Yeah.
And give it to them in a way where they don't have to, maybe they can not cut corners, but they can get to the answer maybe a little bit faster, but more importantly, get there in their own way, however their motor moron or mental midget state might be. And I think a lot of times people they object to that principle because they have found a way that somehow they have verbalized in their own head or they think sounds right coming out of their mouth, right, somehow. And at some level, maybe some way they got lucky, or maybe it worked for that particular individual that they gave the instruction to in that very specific way. And that has now become how they instruct everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And that is very, very different than what I see. That's the vast difference between what I see here, like in an environment like this in this room, and how they're instructing people. They're very careful, again, going back downstairs, very careful not to take this off the rails. Like, let's remember what our objective here is and what the basic principles are involved here in order to obtain that objective. And if you ask yourself that question, you go back to those two things, you will invariably answer that question for yourself. But if you're not willing to go there, right, because you just can't take yourself there or whatever the case is, or you lack a fundamental knowledge or understanding, this is going to be a really long, arduous, painful, not probably fun process. Mm-hmm. So I can go back to the nature or nurture piece. I want to believe that innately everybody has that in them somewhere. They just haven't been willing to explore it, or nobody's challenged them in a way to actually have to think about it in the way that you describe, which these are basic principles. Let's understand that you need to understand those principles. Did you violate that principle? I don't know. What don't you know? And start there. Like, what don't you know versus, well, try this. Because you haven't answered the first question yet.
Yeah.
And so if you're not going there, like, again, very painful. Now you're guessing. Yeah. Now you're guessing and you're trying to pull like, well, how did that guy say it? Maybe he said it differently and I'll understand it differently. And then you find maybe that guy fixed your problem and now he's God, right? That is the deity and everything he says is my truth. And never going out and exploring anything else that anybody else might be saying, that you've just accepted that. Much different than this environment.
People build like castles around ways of thinking, right? And once it's built, right, it's very hard for them to take those walls down, right? And it becomes like this becomes, and the more they buy into a way of thinking, the more that they are constrained and confined from the outside way, where life is still happening, people are still growing, right? Just like jiu-jitsu, the combatives world, it's a process-focused journey with no discernible endpoint, right? And you have to be willing. Yeah, I build castles around the way that I'm thinking, but as soon as somebody knocks on the door and is like, hey, we're building bigger castles, we're going to take this wall down, and we're going to expand it and build it a little bit bigger.
Right. Yeah, I think the challenge is that their perspective on shooting, it's like, it's a thesis. It's a paper that they wrote, and it's an explanation. They think their instruction is an explanation they give. And this isn't math class, right? I can't actually, explaining shooting is a way to convey things, but actually isn't helpful. It's about physical performance, right? So the real challenge of a good instructor is somebody who forces their students to experience correct behavior, right, in the process.
That's a great point.
Well, that same question as far as like, hey, what does winning look like?
Yep.
That goes back to, you ask yourself that as an instructor. And for me, winning looks like the student continues to train while I'm not there. And that's really what we see a commonality here is like these guys are teaching them how to train. And for some guys, that's a scary thing because, hey, I lose my job now, right? They're going to be able to figure it out without me. But that's because they're not process focused. They're not going through the repetition. They're not like, Matt's going to be a way different shooter next year than he is this year. Yeah. And tennis courts, like I said, right? As far as these guys go through that process, their evolution is going to occur there. And what I'll say too is like, and this is kind of a question to pose to the listeners. What are you not achieving because you don't like the negative emotion that comes with the failure?
Yeah, man.
Like, what are you not achieving because of that? And I think that's really what's going on.
Everything.
Right.
You're not,
Right. So there's so many things that are like, you're holding yourself back just because of negative emotion, because you feel bad. That's silly to me. Like, I think, like, there are people who get anxiety about public speaking the same way I am about to like step out onto a match or, get shot with a sim. And it's like, it's just negative emotion, man. Like, process through it and, change your outlook as far as like where that's what does that actually mean for you? And I think you're going to get better as far as anything that is that you try to try. Like, I've competed in jiu-jitsu and I've competed in shooting. In my first jiu-jitsu match, I was disqualified. In my first competition shooting match, I was disqualified. I'm a black belt today. I'm a B-class shooter today because I just continued that journey. It was just like, okay, I know what not to do. Let me try something else and not get fucking DQ'd.
Hey, when you shoot him, have you ever tried not being disqualified?
Yeah, right.
Let's try that on this match. You'll typically get a better result where you will be on the board.
Yeah, right.
I mean, again, that's a very simple way of looking at it, right? Yeah. But it is the right way to look at it. Like, let's try not to get... Let's go to a match today and let's try not to get disqualified. Yeah. That's a good goal.
Yeah,
that's a good
set
goal.
The bar nice and low. So finishing a match was like, oh, okay, that's awesome. Right?
Yeah, I think you talk about like what winning looks like. For me, today I think in the class that we did, back-to-back dry fire classes, and then we removed a lot of barriers that people would have for training. Yeah. Right? We gave them dummy rounds. That solved, this is why you use this is why it's going to be important. We gave them dry fire targets. Winning would be if 10% of those guys wake up in the morning and before combatives, they set a target up and they do a little bit of what we did earlier today. To me, that's a win because now I've affected somebody training when I'm not there, right? That's a win, right? And now you at least took the first step to start on this process, right? I say it all the time to people that are like, oh, I'm so excited to go to my first match, a practical shoot. I'm going to get into this. It's like, dude, I'm happy for you. Welcome to the nightmare. You're never going to be good enough. It's never going to be enough. Yeah. And it's just a process, right, with no end point. You just keep going.
Yeah, or like when people ask, like, hey, when do I get good at this jiu-jitsu thing? You never do. Like, you don't.
Yeah,
like, this is not a thing.
Good is a relative term.
Yeah, right. I want you to lower your expectation for what good means.
Yeah, the objective there being, bringing it back to jiu-jitsu is like, how do you know? I was asking, Aaron and I were talking to the group today, and just about how they're approaching their training outside of the mat, for the fight. Mm-hmm. So how do you train for the fight? In comparison to training for the fight versus training how to fight, mm-hmm. and the pieces that need to be put into that. And so again, from the human performance perspective, we recognize like we're bringing a very small piece to this, right? And that is like, how does your body perform, right? How can you perform physically from a strength, power, and speed, capacity perspective? And that's a slice of the pie of all the things that go into being good on the mat. And the question I asked was like, how do you know if you're good at jiu-jitsu? And a couple of hands went up, like, well, you get more tap outs at practice that day. Mm-hmm. Okay. Somebody said the promotion system. Mm-hmm. I said, okay. Like that, to me, that's very subjective, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of variables that go into that, right? Like, well, who are you rolling with today? Right. Like, was he better than you? Was he just having a bad day? Like, what's going on there? And on the promotion system side of things, obviously there's a lot of subjectivity in that. Like, who gives you that belt? Who decides, right? Like, how much did you pay, right? Because if you're, like I've been to schools before in the past, this was my early experience where, look, if you're paying your tuition, you're going to get those belts. Yeah. Or even in jiu-jitsu, you fill out your card every time, you come enough times, that qualifies you. That's a qualifier to get a promotion of some kind. And then what are the other things that I have to do, right? The only way to really understand if like you are good at jiu-jitsu today is if you go to a tournament, compete, and your hand gets lifted at the end of the thing. So I think going back to understanding process, and you were talking about jiu-jitsu, that the things you guys are talking about there really resonate with me with the lessons that you get taught in jiu-jitsu, mm-hmm. but then also like measuring like how are you getting better. And the thing that you said there is like, look, you're never going to be that great at this, so stop thinking that. Yeah. Stop thinking that. Not you suck at jiu-jitsu.
You're asking the wrong question.
You're asking the wrong fucking question, man. You're not exploring this right. Your head is in the wrong place. Yeah. I'm going to ask you, Matt, the question that I asked Jeff earlier, and that was if you kind of explain a little bit about some of the things that went well today with regard to teaching people how to train or get better. What was like your big take? Was there any light bulb moments? Do you ever have those like in these sessions and in an environment like this? Was there anything that like stands out to you today in your own session?
The thing that stood out to me was like that I really appreciated and liked was the interaction, right? Guys who are already doing work, already discovering things, asking very specific questions about, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Like, I love that challenge. It's not that you're challenging, what I'm presenting, but you're saying, hey, I know this to be a different truth. And it's like, okay, well, let's compare those things. So to me, the interaction is really good. In terms of light bulb moments, this would be the first time that I've actually taught like a dedicated where, I teach dry firing in every class, but there's always a shooting component.
Right, yeah.
Right. And I think it's, the win for me today was like to share my experience with dry fire training and kind of the progression, but more importantly, like the things that I did wrong for years that I had to go back and rework. Right. And to me, it's like, we can round that curve. Like, don't make these mistakes, right? I've already experienced this. I focused on this thing for too long and it ended up not paying dividends. And I had to go back and refocus on this, right? And that question got presented today, with classifiers, right? And they're like, I'm like, hey, I don't value, kind of a very fast draw. Right. I get it. Like that's going to be a component of more work and it's something you have to have. But to me, I'm not putting in a ton of effort to be able to draw to a first shot in, 0.7 of a second, 0.8 of a second. Right. That's not going to win anything. And guys, well, what about the classifiers? I'm going, the biggest flex in a match is when they finish your division and you're sitting at the top of it and there's an A after your name and the 5 guys below you have G's. That's the flex.
Right.
Not the fact that you finished 11th in the match, but you shot a 90% on the class. No, good for you, buddy. You still got 11th, right? Focus on the other things that are important. And that's something that I did that, I was very, thought I understood training. I was like, hey, the stand and shoots up, this is where it's at. And I was doing well in matches, but then realizing like I'm not finished. Like I am getting consistently outpaced in terms of like movement around the stages, right? And it wasn't because of planning. It was like I was focused on one thing. I could draw fast and reload fast, make the bullets go where I wanted to with relative high levels of certainty. But what I wasn't focused on was like moving, the classifier, that's one stage. Right, in a club match, that's 1 of 6 to 7 stages. Big deal. And it's typically worth about 50, 60 points. The guys that are crushing it, from the competitive side, the guy that's getting the 150-point stage, and he's getting all those points. He's willing to give you, hey, I'll give you 60 points from the classifier, and I'll just take 50% of that. But now I'm going to take 150 points on this stage, and you're going to take 50% of that. Let's see where we're at after that, right? So focusing on the right things in training and rounding that curve off for people, like I wish somebody would have done that for me.
Yeah, because then you learn then you understand where the percentage of time and the training time that you do have should be spent on the things that do matter. I mean, you mentioned like violating fundamental principles. Getting a draw is a fundamental principle, right? Like, or there's fundamental principles in that, like you can't do the shooting unless you can get the gun out, right? So there's some things there. But how much time do I spend on that versus the things that happen once that gun is out? As compared to how important the timing is between getting it out of the holster and then getting it up to actually do the thing. And for some people, they may go down a really long rabbit hole on why that is super important in a gunfight or in an opposed challenge versus in a USPSA match. Practically speaking, what are you training for? How are you spending your time? Where are you putting your effort? So, going back to like the human performance piece, one of the things that Aaron presented on today was the work that IEP has done with regard to surveying very specific population of law enforcement officers and how they approach their training physically, like in the gym. And when I say in the gym, I don't mean on the jiu-jitsu mat or I mean like the traditional gym, lifting weights and maybe running and taking care of their cardiovascular fitness and all that stuff. And this was really telling to me when I first saw them do this, and then I really dug into the data that they had actually collected back. And that was, they're basically surveying on like, what are the most important things for you on your job with regard to the human performance piece, the physical output piece. And so they ranked a few things there. And then what are the things that you are training? How are you ranking your training, right? And basically they were inverse. These are the things that I think are really important, right? And these are the things that I'm actually training in the gym, and they were opposite. They were stacked on one another, right? So then the next question is like, well, why? Why are you doing that? And it's kind of like a bunch of big eyeballs, and everybody's looking at one another like, I guess I don't really know the answer to that question. And that's okay. But now what do you do, right? Yeah. Now what do you do? So if you're spending all this time on your, on your draw, right? But you still can't do that thing that's so important once it's out. Like, why are we spending so much time there when that's not the thing that's really that important in the first place? And by the way, these guys were telling IEP that. We're not telling them what they should be doing. They're telling us what they should be doing. We're just going, yeah, you're probably right. Yeah. Thanks for validating where we're going with this conversation. Now let's talk about how to do those things and why it's important.
And I think you have to, like, it's what you assign value to, right? Like I would tell, when I tell people like, hey, I'm not really concerned with the speed of like I value consistency of the draw above everything else, right? I would take a career lifelong 1.1 second draw, at 7 yards to a guaranteed A zone and
every time,
100% of the time, rather than, 50% of the time I'm going to be 8/10 and then I'm going to be at 1-2 and I have this big variation, right? I value consistency, where it took me a lot of years to get to that point where I used to think, speed and accuracy were competing efforts, and I talk about like accountability from the fighting with a gun standpoint, accountability, control, and performance, that those are competing efforts. And what I realized, if I focus on consistency, I can have all three of those things at a very high level, right? But if performance is not matched to accountability and control, then there's bad things that happen. If I'm way too accountable and I'm in control, then the performance isn't there. So it's understanding like how to conceptualize things correctly. And it was a simple one statement I got from Rob Latham years ago. It was like, if you're drawing, to a guaranteed A zone at 10 yards at 1.3 seconds, move on to something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Assigning that value. You said that, I think somebody asked you that, or it came up in the conversation today about like, that's what I want. I want that accuracy, right? And I want the consistency in that accuracy every single time, because we see a lot of things where I would much rather be able to put that round exactly where I want it to, right on that first time and the second time, all the way up to the 5th and the 15th time, rather than getting it out really fast and putting a lot of bullets in a lot of places that don't have any value at the end of the day. So if you just kind of reverse that thinking, because they're going everywhere, but they're not doing the thing that you need it to do. So going back to the assigning the value and the time that you put in there, like that is the thing that sets up, like take it as slow or as fast as you can to put you in the position to do the thing that you need to do. Choose the thing or spend the time in the thing that now builds the foundation, which is getting to that grip, right? It's the first thing that you've got to do. You got to get obviously the gun up, but you got to have that grip in order to do or perform with that accuracy and the consistency in the way you need to, because you might get that first one off, right, with a shitty grip, but now do that 3 more times or 4 more times. You're fucking with this stuff's going to show up down range somewhere. It's not going to be consistent. Going back to human performance, it is exactly the same thing. Like it's the same thing. You need to build the foundational stuff first and stop worrying about the sexy stuff or the thing that's seemingly important for whatever the reasons or whatever you've decided in your own head, because you're not setting yourself up for the long-term success, again, with the principal things that are going to help you be accurate, be consistent over time, that then you can actually diagnose, right? Because if you're coming out with an inconsistent grip, how do you know what the fucking change when, once you're there, on the thing? I mean, you might figure it out, but
I think this is why like the sport versus street or practical versus tactical, why those arguments have permeated for so long.
It's boring to me.
Well, yeah, it's a freshman argument, right? Like if that's you at home, like just it's time to move on to second grade kind of deal. So, but it's like most people, like there's the layman is generally always focused on the wrong things. You know what I mean? Like they're almost always focused on the wrong things. They look at the outcome as the goal instead of looking at those things as the byproduct of engage in a process. Like, Matt, the shooting analogy is like there is a process that he's got there where he can provide consistency because of the dedication to the process. And the outcome just happened to be there. It wasn't that he was specifically chasing this arbitrary metric. It just happened to be there just because of that. So that's kind of like really what I've seen with all the instructors in this whole event. Is just that like almost everybody else is kind of focused on the wrong things, and very few guys are actually focused on very deep thinking about what it is that they're actually doing, so that way they can actually go through this process, get better, and get the results there that most people are achieving. But like those guys don't really care about that. They're just kind of like, it just happened.
The argument, the tactical versus competition, like that argument is the same. You hear in the fitness, like somebody saying bodybuilders aren't strong.
Right.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Ronnie Coleman's not strong. Okay. You don't even know what you don't know.
Right.
Right. Like it's the same. You hear it all the time. Well, practical shooters are fast. They're not accurate. Have you ever shot with a world-class practical shooter?
Right.
The bullets go exactly where he wants them to go every time. He just does it, at a fraction of the speed you do, right? Because he stripped it all away. So and I think the events like this, those arguments they're dying.
Yeah.
And they're not even dying a slow death. Those things are getting melted, crushed, on the regular basis.
Yeah.
What's the relationship between process, results, and arriving? And are those things that are tied together? Can you separate process and results? Or are they all part of the same thing?
Well, I think if you, from talking about shooting specifically, if I'm focused on results, then the process looks a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right? If I'm focused on actual learning and understanding, and I'm focused on the process, the results may not look the way I want them to initially, but I'm learning more on how to get those results. Okay. If that makes sense, right? You figure, if a lot of people are outcome based training, right? Military and law enforcement, where you show up, I have X amount of time, I need to now get you to hit the target. Right. And I can give you things, give you controls, things that are not best practices. And I got you the results you wanted. And you walk away from that having learned nothing. But if I teach you how to train, you may never be happy. We may never achieve the results that you wanted to for that day, but I've set you up for success. It's the, teach a man to fish type, saying.
Yep. Is it the same in jiu-jitsu?
I would say that whenever somebody starts talking to me about results or really they're really focused on it, I think their training approach is very immature. Okay. I think that it's generally going to be, they're kind of focused on the wrong things. They're like, yeah, how do I get the tap? And then what happens is they start sacrificing pretty much everything else that would help their benefit. And this is why kind of like in shooting, at least for me, my experience, my anecdotal experience there, my progress in jiu-jitsu versus the progress in shooting has been so much different. Like in jiu-jitsu, it was happening in peaks because for a long time, I was focusing on getting that tap, doing everything I needed to do, get the tap. And I wasn't even developing my jiu-jitsu. So like if a guy was better than me technically, I would just start using, I'd get physical with them. So I started like beasting them until I can kind of like wear them out. Mm-hmm. And it slowed down my technical development so much. And to where now I understand that I can objectively look at the competition shooting world. I'm like, okay, I see this guy who is in his geriatric years. This one's chain smoking. This one doesn't work out, but they're moving so much faster and so much more efficiency than I am. And this is not a game of athletics at all. This is just that focus on the process. So my progress in shooting has been much faster because I understand that just because I have this other thing in the background. So that in terms of results, like, okay, what's the result on a classifier? The results do is they just give me data as far as like, okay, what are the areas as far as like the holes I need to plug in and how do what do I need to take back to my process, take that to my lab and continue to refine.
What about in human performance?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think John actually just kind of filled in some of the things I would have said on that. And when you look at human performance and process results and arrival to whatever the goal is, going back to training or teaching somebody how to train and being a coach or being an instructor, however you want to look at this, I think one of the first things you have to do is you have to evaluate where has this person been, where are they right now, and where are they trying to go? And those things have to be very well understood. And some of them are going to be depending on the person, and so that depends on the person. So I think in the short answer to your question is it depends. But what does that mean? So like if somebody's coming in and they have a performance goal of whatever that is, I've got to take a look at like what's been their process to this point and where are they now, and compare that against where they're telling me they want to go or where they need to go. And so in some cases, this person may be very experienced in this thing of exercise or performance or whatnot, but their experiences has gotten this far, but they're in front of me for a reason, right? Whatever that reason, or maybe they don't have any experience at all. I love those people because then their past really doesn't matter. I get a fresh, clean slate to work with, right? And I think that's what you're talking about with with shooting as compared to jiu-jitsu. Your clean slate was shooting, but you had this experience, this learning process through jiu-jitsu. But my point of this is like the human body is a fascinating thing in terms of how it will take on information, process, and then output that, the inputs that you put into it. So versus, again, so the new person, they're very malleable, right? You can get them to do things fairly quickly. And as a result, that process then yields results generally pretty quickly if applied properly. So like on the strength component, as an example, if somebody comes in and they're very weak or they've never strength trained before, or in some cases, they've had some amount of strength training, they were sort of an athlete maybe at some point in life, just a little bit of raw material there to work with. On week one, that 10-pound dumbbell or that 20-pound dumbbell on that arm curl is a really lame example. Feels really heavy, right? But by week 3, they need a 25-pound dumbbell. And it's not that they gained a bunch of muscle, right? Or they got this inhuman strength, or that is just this, genetic mutant or whatever else. It's just that we turned on the systems in the body to help it be a more efficient, more proficient. We're cutting corners. We're turning on more of what's available, right? However, the difference would be is somebody that can already curl 50 pounds, but they look like shit, their shoulder hurts, and they have tendonitis in their elbow, right? Like, well, now I've got to take a different approach to the process. And as a result, as it relates to the results, that might mean the results that they're looking for need to be a different result. And they need to understand that the arrival to that result is not what they maybe thought it was going to be when they got there. So we have to kind of unwind or untangle the sticky web. So if somebody comes in as a shooter that's been taught the same way for, 10 years, this is how I learned it, and this is what I've been practicing, but they want to get better at this thing, you have to be able to sort of diagnose, like, what are the things that we have to untangle here? And then how is that process going to look for that person based on who they are, their willingness to accept this new information, set aside the ego, the grit, the commitment, all the things that we've kind of talked about to get there. And so I don't know if it's a perfect, example there, but on the human performance side, again, what I would say is there's a lot of depends. And the other way to look at this is like, if I'm trying to increase and this is an example I used today, if I'm that person that's trying to increase my deadlift from 150 pounds to 250 pounds, that process is going to look similar, but the results are going to look very different than the person that's trying to get their deadlift from 500 pounds to 550 pounds. That makes sense. The process is very similar. We apply the same principles, right? But the way we apply those principles, and when we talk about like what's the frequency of training and the intensity of training, the types of things that we're going to give them is going to look very different. So I don't think that people, particularly in the shooting world, because there's so many people kind of coming into it, and they're getting all this information from all these areas, and it is very different in terms of the things they need to know that they don't even know yet, versus exercise, which is kind of a known thing. People know if I go to the gym, I lift weights enough, I'm gonna get a little stronger, right? I build a little bit more endurance. It's just kind of a known thing. But because it is so unknown on the shooting side in a lot of ways, or it was taught a very certain way for a very certain amount of time, people are very confused by this and they end up being very resistant to it. I don't know, it's my very long, convoluted answer, but I still think it's very similar. Yeah. In terms of arrival to that, I guess I would say, like, we have to clearly define what arrival will mean for you. How are you going to know when you got there? And I don't think people coming into this stuff generally have a very well-developed idea of what that is, or concrete answer for what that is for them. And as a result, they don't know how to like ask the right questions to get themselves there. And that is going back to the training and simplifying things. So like, be asking yourself, I think John just said it, be asking yourself this question. You pose it to the audience. Ask yourself this question, like, what does this actually look like for you? And no, I mean that. Like, sit there and think about that a little bit. And so before you start asking questions, understand what that is. Because if you're just asking questions to cut the corner and get to the arrival without going through that process, yeah, you're setting yourself up for failure long-term in the end. I don't know how you guys feel about that, if that made any sense whatsoever, but I'm sticking to that answer.
No, it makes perfect sense to me. And I think the process-oriented guys don't ever arrive. Right? Because it continues, right? You might arrive at a goal or a ceiling that you wanted to achieve, and then as fast as you get that, you're more excited about
the next thing,
and you move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I think the idea of arrival is just an immature understanding of like how the world works, right? It is life is a process of sanctification that just continues. And so if you have the process, you're trying to go for a certain result. You get to that result, that just unlocks something else, which is another process that you need to be engaged in to get to the next point. I mean, you made that point today multiple times with the frustration of like, people think they're going to arrive if they become a GM, right? And it's like, well, no, now you're in trouble because everyone's trying to. You just
created a whole nother set of concerns.
Yeah.
Right. You're like, oh, that's great, I made this. Nope. Now you got to win all the time. Yeah. Right. Now there's an expectation that you have to live up. Like, you think you're going to back off on training. Nope. You just started it. right? Same thing, I'm sure, with getting your black belt. Like, oh, I got my black belt finally. Everyone's coming after you.
The journey has just begun.
Fucking worst, dude. It's the fucking worst. Dude starts stretching. Like, dude starts stretching and shit. Like, oh, okay, here we go.
How much would you just prefer to be like a very, very good purple belt?
Oh man, that's like the best belt, man. Skipping warm-ups, no expectations, you know? So yeah, but it's like, you know, to compare it to kind of like human performance, I think as you acquire more skill, the weight just doesn't come off the bar. It's just, you just continue to add more. It just continues to get heavier. The burdens you continue to lift, the competition gets heavier. And for me, that keeps things interesting. I think I can speak for the rest of us. Like that's what keeps things interesting for us. But I think for some people, they're missing out if that's what they're running away from.
Well, we're gonna test Matt's skills real quick, and I'm gonna ask Jeff. Like, so today you sat through a match dry fire session down there today.
It's terrible.
So there you go. There we go. Mindset and things like that. What'd you take away, man? Like, what were like light bulb moments? And when you say terrible, what do you mean by that?
I was just being facetious.
Yeah, I got you.
So that question was one of my big takeaways from today was just like, I thought that was apparent in Matt's block and also in your guys' block of just like, there is this process. And it's sometimes it's cliche in our shooting world or training world. People say, oh, it's all about the process. It's all about the process. And it is all about the process, but that is not divorced from the results. Mm-hmm. The reason why you are engaged in the process is to get a certain result. Right? Which then goes back to what we were talking about before. It's, but you never arrive. You achieve the result and you never arrive. And now it's again a process. And that process could, that's going to take place in various areas of your life, whether it is, human performance or dry fire or jujitsu or loving your kids or whatever the thing is. Like there is a process that you need to engage in and be intentional about. And then you're going to get certain results that are going to come out of that. And that was apparent in all of the classes today. And I think that's because of the perspective, the life experience and the perspective of all the different instructors who are coming here at the summit, who are sharing that with them or with students. And again, I think that it is probably more, it's definitely tied to anyone who is engaged in performance, right? Yeah. And there definitely is something about combatives and jiu-jitsu where that is distilled a little bit more than I think other areas, right? You can have other areas of whether it's a fitness thing or a shooting thing. Like there's tons of people in the shooting world who don't get that at all. They want their red shirt, they want their instructor hat, and they want to, bark at everybody on what they need to do and stand there and talk forever and sound really cool about themselves, think they're really cool. And that's very common in the shooting gun world. It is less common, I think, in the combatives, jiu-jitsu kind of space. Yeah.
I think, we talk all the time about it's process focused, but I think people need to understand, like I'm talking about the training side of it, right? Make no mistake, we're in a results-based business, 100%, right? In jiu-jitsu, result-based is the tap. It's winning, right? It's domination, right? In the shooting world, it's surviving, right? Sometimes it just looks like surviving. Right, getting through the worst day, right? If you're talking about on the defensive side, getting through that and being successful. If you're talking about matches, it's winning, right? That's why you're putting all this work in. That's why you're so engaged in the process, because it's a result-based. I'm not doing this because I want to be really good at shooting. Like I want to win, right? Every time I go to a match, I'm going to win. Right. Every time I, in my professional life, in the military, I'm going to win. Right. I don't lose. Right. That's the mentality. The way that you don't lose is focus on the process.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. It's actually a really great way to wrap it up. Because you mentioned the word cliche. I think just because the words get used, words matter. And I think just because words get used a lot doesn't mean it's a cliche. I think it becomes cliched when people using the words don't understand what the actual word means at the end of the day. And it kind of gets just overlaid on all kinds of other things. So you just articulated that really well in a different way for me in terms of the mindset around winning and knowing that you should, you can, and you will, right? but that's not the thing you're focused on that day. You're focused on the process of how to, in practice, focused on the process of how to make that happen for you, not on that solely. And I don't know, in a world, again, I find it really interesting, this parallel universe that shooting and jujitsu, or let's call it combatives, but we've used jujitsu. How people arrive at the same things in terms of winning, but how different they look at it when it really is more or less the same. And it is the process-driven approach to getting it done. So, yeah, I get you, and I hear that, because we hear a lot of things in fitness where it's like, oh, it's a fucking buzzword, and everybody wants to use this. And we hear it in shooting too. It's a buzzword. This. Well, it's only a buzzword when somebody's using it inappropriately, or in a way that's completely out of line. It just doesn't add up. So, I'll just wrap it up at this and just say this, man. First, I want to thank everybody for joining me for the time that we had. I certainly, the reason I have these conversations is to share them with other people, and but selfishly, it's because I get to extract value from the people that honor me with their time and grace me with their time. So I appreciate you guys doing that. It's been a long day, and there was a lot of travel to get here. We got 2 more long days. I don't know if everybody's hanging around for that, but I'm in it to the end. That'll be winning for me, making it to the end. And then, in the meantime, as we kind of wrap up here, and just kind of, with regard to the Combative Summit, just kind of putting a plug in here. If what the listeners or the viewers are getting from this today is a little something different, or feels a little different than what they may have gotten from other classes, or even heard from Matt or heard from Jeff or John, in the past, it's not different. I think what's happening is it's just being validated in a different kind of way. Not that you need validation, Matt. Not that Matt needs validation. Not that John needs validation. But it's really cool to see how hard you're hanging on to the same stuff you knew to be true, and whatever that is, whether it's jiu-jitsu, life, business, relationships, whatever else. Because when you come to something like this, you see that it is true. And you start to kind of realize, and I was talking to Jeff with the G, Jeff Dahl today, about like, I need this shit to be reminded of that. Like, I need to come to these places and an event like this to be reminded of that. I also need to be reminded that I'm not a weirdo, right? That there are lots of other people.
There's a lot of other weirdos.
There's a lot of other weirdos. And I'm going to stay weird. Like, sometimes I think about, maybe I'm too weird, or maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the weirdo. But I'm going to stay weird because you guys shared time with me, and giving me a little bit of your energy and yourselves today. So like I said, with the risk of overdoing it when I always do this, I appreciate you, dudes. Thanks so much. I can't wait for the next couple of days. Let's go eat.
Yes, my pleasure.